button, and now it's going to take about 20 seconds for it to start. And it's a little weird because it has this lag. It's almost ready. Okay, and we're good to go.
Hey, well, good evening, and it's great to see everybody. The Finlandia Foundation National Capital Chapter welcomes you to an evening of Finnish America. I'm Taru Spiegel, the FFNCC newsletter editor. And just a quick reminder here that there will be a question and answer session after Hilary's talk. And it's a huge pleasure to introduce our presenter, Professor Hilary-Joy Virtanen, who will tell us about some unique Finnish American customs. Hilary teaches Finnish and Nordic studies at Finlandia University in Hancock, Upper Michigan. Her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison was in folklore and Scandinavian studies. And prior to COVID, she directed the annual Paloheimo Fellows field research in Finland. Hilary's deep roots in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where her family settled over 100 years ago, has been an inspiration for her field research into UP's many folk cultures. Hilary has been the recipient of many awards and grants, and she's the author of a number of publications. Her forthcoming book is called The Bear Rolls Over, a Finnish midwinter festival in the Upper Midwest. So look forward to that book when it comes out. And so a virtual warm welcome to Hilary-Joy.
Thank you. So thanks everybody for coming. And hyvää Urhon päivää. So I should say, when COVID ends, this field trip that I do with the students, the Paloheimo Fellows program, it's a really, really wonderful chance for students to get to go and experience Finland firsthand. And I do hope sometime, possibly in the year 2022, I'll get to take students again, because it's a really, really transformative part of the teaching and learning that the students get to do here. And I miss it dreadfully. So also I've run out of salmiakki, and that's really not good. So, today I'll be telling you about these two Upper Midwestern Finnish American folklore characters that have been developed just over the past nearly 70 years now. And we'll talk about what they are, how they're kind of emanated, and how you can see them grow. And we'll also talk about why they exist. So there's kind of interesting, important reasons why they exist. I do want to say, though, that there are a handful of people I know up here who are both from the regions that we'll be talking about in the Upper Peninsula and the Iron Range of Minnesota. And so I do invite you to share your St. Urho's Day traditions, too. So, when I do my research, a lot of it has to do with what I see in the Upper Peninsula, and I'll admit that I don't get a chance to go to the really, really wonderful and fantastic festivals that the Iron Rangers have. Y'all are legendary, and I can't wait to just get to be there on an actual St. Urho's Day. I might join the drag competition if I'm allowed, but it's a really, really wonderful thing that you all get to do over there. So please be sure to share your stories of stuff. If there's anything missing, it's St. Urho and Heikkilunta both expand every year in different ways that are really hard to track. And so it's really great to get to hear about it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can take a look at pictures together that aren't just my face. But I should acknowledge the fact that I do have a St. Urho bobblehead behind me. So I do have a idol of the saint. And this was actually created in 2004 for the FinFest USA that happened in Minneapolis. And I believe it was a fundraiser for scholarships. So I'm actually really, really proud to have one. These are pretty rare. It was also the first time my luggage was examined by the TSA because it was wrapped in a formed styrofoam packaging. And so I think they thought it was some sort of, device of terror or something. And no, it was really just a bobblehead. So I will put this now into Slideshow. So I liked the title that was given for this paper. I don't know who came up with it, but I really liked it better than the thing I was thinking of. So thank you, because this is about St. Urho's Day and the secrets of Heikkilunta. And so we have our two heroes right here that we'll see coming up. So the first thing I want to say is that this story is going to take place primarily in the Upper Midwest, which we can call a Finnish American hotspot. And so this is a map that was done by John Kilpinen at Valparaiso University in Indiana. And what he did was he took, there's a similar image that's gone around that shows the same data from the year 2000, but this is updated from the 2010 census with community survey estimates from 2012. And so what he's showing here is the proportion of people who claim Finnish ancestry on the US Census. And so you can see that, if most of the country has 0.5% or less people claiming Finnish ancestry in their community on the census, but sometimes it gets a little bit darker blue in different places. And so you can see, for instance, in this little place down here in Iowa, about 0.6 to 3.1% think that they're, claim that they're Finnish, think that they're Finnish. They are Finnish. If you say you are, then you are. We'll let you in. And the colors, as they get darker, they get higher up. But when you get up to this top number up here in this top darkness, it's 21.1 to 39.8% Finnish ethnic. And you can see that the area that really claims this is right here. So it's this 3 to 4 county area where I live in the Upper Peninsula called the Copper Country. You can also see that the second darkest spot really on the map is right over here in the Iron Range of Minnesota. So this really is kind of a stronghold of Finnishness. If people who haven't been to this region, if you drive through, you'll see things like Finnish names on post office boxes. You'll see Finnish place names. There's entire towns that are named things like Finland, Minnesota, or Nisula, Michigan, or I'm from Toivola, Michigan. So, this Finnishness that exists in this area is just everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere. You can see it in the grocery stores with the products that are available. You can see it with the people that you talk to. You can see it with their mannerisms and the words that they use. So to get to be in a region like this that has such a strong importance on Finnishness kind of shows that it's something that you end up seeing a lot in the everyday. And it's not, you can go to all these other places in the United States and not see the Finnish American things that you'll see in these kind of stronghold regions. The other thing I'll point out is that there's kind of a northern band of stronghold regions that you see. There's some places in New Hampshire and Maine, for instance, that have a strong Finnish heritage, places in Massachusetts as well, lots of places in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and then, patches here and there in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and all the way out west. And one of the common features that a lot of these places has is the work that was offered to people who were immigrants at that time. So first thing I will say again is just that this area that we're looking at is really the kind of hotbed of Finnish American longstanding culture. There are places that have higher numbers, like for instance, you could look at cities that have large numbers of Finnish ethnic people, either born from Finland and come over, or Finnish longstanding ethnicity here. But they won't end up being that high percentage proportion that kind of causes influence on the broader population that you'll see in the kind of this northern ethnic belt that you see. So Finns started coming to the United States starting in the middle of the 1800s, and there were both what sociologists and kind of migration historians would refer to as push factors and pull factors that brought them here. So push factors are what causes people to be pushed out of their home country. So this is what caused people to leave Finland. The things that were causing people to leave Finland in the 1800s included landlessness. So there was the land ownership situation was such that the growing population of young people, especially young men who would own farms, didn't really get to because there wasn't enough kind of farmland to go around, and inheritance laws were such that, like the oldest son would typically get the land. And if you were the youngest kid, like say you've got 10 brothers and you're one of the youngest people, you might end up just being a farmhand for your oldest brother, which I know that, I have younger sisters and they would really, really be upset to have to be farmhands to me for the rest of their lives. They would hate it. We were fine siblings. We get along better now. But so that's one factor, is that landlessness. There's also the shift from the industry is starting to kind of grow in Finland. And so industrial jobs are starting, and this is kind of causing more kind of globalization to go on. There's people coming and showing up in Finland with boats and taking materials away from Finland and bringing materials to Finland. And so there's this kind of larger possibility of hopping on a boat and going somewhere. Other problems that were going on in Finland in the middle of the 1800s included common famines. So there were a series of famines between the 1860s, and the last one was about 1892, which caused the poorest of the poor to really, really be devastated. There was this period between 1867 and 1868 where thousands upon thousands of people just died because they didn't have enough food. And so any place that you could go to that might have the opportunity of more food started sounding better and better and more feasible to go to. One of the other common factors that a lot of Finnish Americans in this region, I get a lot of stories from students whose ancestral story is that their parent, or not their parent, their great-grandparent or great-great-grandparent had been conscripted into the Finnish army and decided not to join. And this actually is a historical fact that in 1902, Finns weren't made to be in the Finnish army for quite a while. They would have to either pay a tax, or for a while they had something you could think of as like a Finnish National Guard. But toward the end of the Russian Empire, oh dear goodness. Hello, person who I'm about to hang up on. And do it. Sorry about that. Oh my goodness. It was great one thing. So anyway, when the Russian Empire decided in about 1899 that they wanted Finns to join the mainstream Russian army, this is kind of like a death sentence for anybody. If you were going to join the Russian army, you would get about a 20-year period of conscription. The life expectancy in Finland and a lot of places across Europe back then was about like 45 or 50. So if you're like an 18-year-old man and you're being told you get to spend the next 20 years in the military and they're going to send you anywhere within the Russian Empire that they want, which could be, right across the sea from Japan, or it could be, in Finland, if you were lucky, it really is like a death sentence. There was an expectation that you might not ever get to see your family again. So, when students tell me that, they're like, I think you fled the Russian army. And then we get to the history book part where they find out it's true. It's like, yeah, y'all were a part of history. You were part of the 50% of conscriptees who refused to show up for duty in 1902. And that's kind of cool, kind of interesting. So these are the push factors that are pushing Finns out. There's, this idea of Russification, idea of kind of political repression. There's actual poverty and famine that are having a problem. And then there's this joblessness, landlessness situation that young people are having. So the pull factors that end up coming from America, the things that are attracting people to leave and pull them out of Finland themselves, had a lot to do with industry. In the copper country and also in Minnesota, mining ends up becoming a big thing. And so up where we're from, obviously copper country, copper is our big mining situation. Iron Range, iron is there. There's also lots of logging, which was another kind of attractive job for people who wanted to get work and get out. But in 1864, recruiter, I should also mention, the Civil War is kind of winding down in the United States, but it's still ongoing. And so a lot of American men are actually involved in the war effort. So there's a labor shortage going on in these places, in different mines and different industries. And so they really do want Europeans to come over and take these jobs so that they can kind of, they actually needed copper for the war effort. So they go ahead up to this place in northern Norway, up kind of near like Kofjord, if I remember correctly, where there were some copper mines. And there happened to be some Finnish migrant workers and also longstanding Finnish ethnics who lived in northern Norway that were working at these mines. So they get recruited to go get on a boat and come over to America. And I'm sure when they got off the boat, they were thinking, did we even get on a boat? This looks very similar to where we just were at home. So, one of the kind of common stories about Finnish Americans is that we probably moved here because it looked just like Finland. It was really at least at very first, just a pleasant coincidence. And so when Finns got here and started mining, and then they eventually moved into farm work, they actually were uniquely suited to be able to wring beets and potatoes out of this short growing season, extremely cold, extremely rocky, poor soil. Like they were built for it. So that's why Finnish farming ends up being kind of a successful thing up here. But so they get pulled out by these job opportunities. And then they write home and say, hey, I'm earning a wage. I've got some money. They need some more helpers. You should come over. And so it starts the ball rolling first with these. First, it was mostly men who are coming, right? Because they're the ones who get attracted into mines. And as a professor at a university, I can only imagine how horrible it must have been to live in an iron range or copper range town in the late 1800s with towns just full of young men. I mean, you think of walking through a dorm with the smell of dirty socks and maybe illicitly hidden beer cans, but an entire village full of that would be quite something. So eventually these communities start to form where Finns and a lot of other people really start to kind of create their own space in America. And the way that this looks is that in addition to Finns getting to come over here, we also have people coming from Southeastern Europe and from places like Russia. So when Finns show up in the Iron Range and the Copper Country, they're joining already established groups of people who typically were Yankees, or you would have Irish, German, Swedish, people who settled here a little earlier than them. They're also, I should say, was a very strong very strong indigenous community in this area. So both northern Minnesota and the Upper Peninsula are on lands that were settled and taken from the Ojibwe peoples and Anishinaabe peoples. And so, we've got indigenous people, and then we've got these kind of longer standing immigrants moving in, people who were closer to being able to speak English. And then you have later immigrants, including the Finns, including Italians, Croatians, other South Slavic peoples. You have people, French Canadians were coming in from Canada because they wanted some work opportunities and other things going on too. So what you end up getting is in these really strange, remote areas, there's almost this kind of cosmopolitanness that you could expect from a big city, just in the sense that there's so much diversity. And so if you ever go to Iron World up in Chisholm, Minnesota, it's now called the Minnesota Discovery Center, they highlight the fact that about 38 different ethnic groups, by language, could be found in that region in the late 1800s. And that's very much the same thing in the Upper Peninsula. So all these different groups, they come, a lot of them, just like Finns, didn't speak any English. They learned the basic words they needed to get around in a mine and to do their basic business. But a lot of things that happened outside of work happened within ethnic enclaves that were created. Mine companies typically would create churches appropriate to the religious beliefs of a different group, but also appropriate to their languages. So, you would have like a Croatian Catholic church, a Polish Catholic church, a French Canadian one. Then you would have a Norwegian Lutheran church, a Finnish Lutheran church, all these different things. So there was this kind of enclaving that would happen, and people would kind of pool up in different neighborhoods and stuff within their ethnic group. And so the first generation or so in these regions, you would see a lot of Finns kind of banding together and being able to use Finnish in their everyday life. There were Finnish newspapers, there were Finnish schools. Suomi College, which is where I work now at Finlandia University, is founded in 1896, just 30 years after the first Finnish immigrants come here. And it's specifically meant to help change the outlook for Finns to, quit having to work in the mines and do really hard physical labor, and to get training in order to do different jobs and to sort of affect a new life in America. One of the other things that Suomi College was very important for was training pastors, because there weren't enough Finnish-speaking pastors in the United States. And not every pastor in Finland who graduated from the University of Helsinki in theology wanted to come over here and, work in the wilds and in the middle of nowhere. So you see this, again, this kind of simultaneous enclave of people like creating their own individual ethnic communities outside of work, and then inside work, they're being exposed to other peoples and meeting other people. Sometimes you could intermarry within that first generation. My great grandpa, he was born in Turku, but as soon as he came here as a child, and about 10, 15 years after he immigrated here, he married a French Canadian lady. His kids spoke French at home. So, these kind of connections would happen pretty quick. After a couple generations, intermarriage becomes more common. Also, children are Americanizing. They're the first generation of these children of miners and loggers who are going to school and meeting kids from other groups. They're having English being forced upon them. A lot of Finnish Americans from the past have these stories of talking in Finnish in the schoolyard and getting in trouble for it. So there's this kind of really false belief that it wasn't American to speak more than one language, and that it also was counterproductive to somebody's success. But what people didn't understand at the time is that the more languages you know, the more your brain actually grows, and that children are uniquely able to learn a ton of languages. So it really wasn't harmful. But for the idea of growing a cohesive American culture, it did feel harmful for them. And so you see this kind of Americanization, but at the same time, these Finnish elements continue to be found, and the ethnic elements for the other ethnic groups too. Finnish Americans, once a sort of established Finnish Lutheran church, the Suomi Synod forms, and also once different Laestadian congregations are formed, this is creating, a spiritual atmosphere whereby people are also maintaining their ethnic presence. People are still doing things like creating the food that they always created that had ethnic ties. Sometimes they're, borrowing stuff from neighbors, trying new ingredients they see at the store. But a lot of times you're going to see a lot of the same traditional dishes being carried over. I mean, if I had $1 for every one of my family members who had the best panukaku recipe, I would have $30, and I would be able to make about 38 pounds of panukaku, right? So again, there's this kind of interesting thing that happens in these enclaves. Like, we're so rural and remote that different cultures are able to maintain some of these individual cultural practices that survive despite what people would think of as kind of unusual odds. And then you also see these really interesting and cool crossovers that happen. So if any of us here from the upper Midwest, we're all familiar with the pasty. We love the pasty. If you're not from the upper Midwest, you might recognize it as a Cornish kind of food pocket. It's like a crust that's full of potatoes and onions and meat. It's delicious. But actually, if you ask people about Finnish dishes here in the Upper Peninsula, a lot of times people will tell you that the pasty is a Finnish dish. And it's because we took it, added carrots to it, and maybe rutabaga, and made it even better. So these kind of inter-ethnic connections happen in ways that people still feel that they're very, very ethnic. And a lot of times when you meet people up here, you can ask them, what ethnicity are you? And they won't necessarily answer, I'm Finnish American, or I'm, Croatian American. They will say, I'm Finnish, or, I'm Finnish and Irish and French, or whatever the thing is. But that whole idea of like having a European ethnicity is still very, very strong up here. And a lot of people can tell you precisely like what percentages they have, even without things like DNA testing, that you could always just tell who you were and who your ancestors were and where they came from. So that makes for this really unique atmosphere for these kind of interesting traditions to develop. So hopefully I've set the stage for the background. And if you do have questions, you can always type them into the chat. If you have an urgent question, because what I'm saying doesn't make sense, you could unmute your mic and go ahead and be like, but wait, what about this? So, feel free if you need. But so I will launch then into the legend of St. Urho. So again, for about 80 years, 90 years, we have Finns coming into the United States. They're settling, they're kind of making this place their own. They're making their own mark on the land, and they're acquiring different American ways. We get into 1956, and now we have multiple generations of people who have grown up here. They might speak Finnish at home. They might speak Finnish at church. They might hear both of these things. They're still practicing different Finnish ethnic traditions, but there's just a little bit of a shift. So, this is the time, the 1950s, of course, are a time when things like car culture are taking off. We have an interstate system that people can drive around on. We have, drive-in movie theaters. We have people having televisions in their home. So there's a lot of social change going on in America across the board, no matter what your ethnic background is. It's right after World War II. So there's an entire generation of young men who've gone out and seen the world and fought for it, and come back and had to rebuild their lives. While the men were gone, the women were out working. So the 1950s is this period that's just seen a very, very rapid rate of change happen. And with this, anytime change starts to happen with different cultures, people sometimes start to freak out about this. And the freak out ends up emanating in the form of St. Urho. So this is a sculpture of St. Urho, which you can find in Monaga, Minnesota. There's actually 2 sculptures of St. Urho that I know of, plus one of the grasshoppers down in Kaleva, Michigan. But essentially what happens with the development of St. Urho is that in 1956, there's 2 stories to his development. One is that a man named Sulo Havomäki from Bemidji, Minnesota, invented St. Urho, and that he chased away a plague of frogs from killing off the grape crop of Finland. And so if you imagine about 12,000 years ago, Finland was this really wonderful place. It was kind of in the interglacial period, and they have magnificent grape crops and the most wonderful wine you could imagine, which sounds much like the Finland of today, right? I think of wine, I think of Finland. But what was happening was that, according to Sulo Havomäki, these frogs were going out and eating all the grapes and disturbing them. There's this other second part of the story, or this other simultaneous creation story, where a man named Richard Matson from Virginia, Minnesota, who works at this department store, also claims that there's a man named St. Urho, but instead of chasing frogs away from the grapes, this man has chased grasshoppers away. And they're grasshoppers about the size of a dog. You can see, if you look closely at this sculpture, that there is indeed an impaled grasshopper on the end of a pitchfork here. And so it's kind of interesting to think that there's these 2 very similar but very different origin stories going on in the same year. I feel like Richard Matson's story has been taken up more. He's the one I usually see cited as the inventor of St. Urho, and also the fact that grasshoppers are the creature that stuck is also very important. But essentially, whoever did it, what happens is that there is, this is the springtime. There's this date called March 17th that a lot of people in America might know of as St. Patrick's Day, which is very important to Irish and Irish Americans. And so in the Iron Range, there were a lot of Irish people that lived there. And so one time, either Matson or Havomäki was being teased about the fact that, oh, we're going to have this really wonderful festival and it's going to be super great. And there's both religion and then a kind of party aspect involved. And it's really great about being Irish. And you Finnish people have nothing like that. Like, how boring your lives must be. And so the response to this was, oh, no, we have this really, really great patron saint, too. He's amazing. And his name is St. Urho. And he is the patron saint of Finnish Americans. And then they explained the story that, the grapes were saved by this creature, whichever creature it was. Now, a couple interesting things to point out about the year 1956 and the name Urho is that in 1956 in Finland, a man named Urho Kekkonen is elected president for the first time. Urho Kekkonen will remain president until 1982, sometimes using very strange means of remaining president. And he's known as the man who kind of helped lead Finland through the Cold War. He's also known as kind of being very wily and very, very, he had his ways. He has this really fierce photo set that he did where he's wearing his shiny leather jacket and he's got a puka on his belt. He looks super cool. I mean, he was like 80 years old and really rocking it. But St. Urho, there's a lot of people point out the fact that, Urho Kekkonen really hits the news as this new president of Finland, that he's really going to be the one to help lead Finland through most of the Cold War. And also that, this is the year that St. Urho was born. So some people really do tie the idea that Urho was connected to this. Sulo Havomäki's daughter actually wrote a letter to the archivist here at Finlandia University back in the 1980s. And the idea that she said was that, right, I'm sorry, I'm getting the guys confused. Richard Mattson, the guy from the department store in Virginia, Minnesota, he said that when he was asked about this, and he was like, yeah, well, we've got this saint too. He thought of a couple other names. So he was thinking of Saint Urho, Saint Jussi, and then Saint Urho. And he says it's a common Finnish name that had a more commanding sound. So I said, we have Saint Urho to save the grape crop. He drove the poisonous frogs from Finland in the last ice age. So that's weird, frogs. Sorry, I'm getting these guys confused now. So he goes ahead and uses this name Urho, and this is the name that really stuck. And it's a great name to say, like, if you're talking about Finnish words, right? Because it's got an H in a seemingly strange spot. It's got that rolled R, which Finnish people love to do, and that, sounds really beautiful when you do it well. So we've got this character now who is set. And one of the things that Richard Mattson's coworker does pretty quickly, a coworker named Jean McKavick, is they decided that they were going to have this festival. Very first year, they decided this festival would take place May 24th. So it must have been a little bit after St. Patrick's Day when this whole thing came about. And they decided, yes, May 24th is his feast day. But very quickly after that, they actually shift his feast day to March 16th, today. And it seems like the reason to do that would be that, you can kind of overtake St. Patrick's Day and be like, oh, well, our festival is great. And it's happening the day before yours. So we're stealing your thunder, people of Ireland. And so that comes out. And so the first time that people at this department store celebrated it, they had a cake. They had people wearing kind of purple and green. I think they might have had some grape juice served because, the grape crop. And also Jean McKavick then writes this ode to Saint Urho. And so this is actually done in the Finnish dialect, which I'll go ahead and read in the Finnish dialect. And we'll see if we can decipher it afterward. Uksi kuksi kulamavi, Santia Urho is the boy for me. He says out the hoppers as big as birds. Never before have I heard those words. He really told those pugs a green, bravest Finn I ever seen. Some celebrate for Saint Pat and his snakes, but Urho poika got what it takes. He got tall and strong from Vilja Sour, and ate kalamajaka every hour. That's why that guy could taste those beetles, but grew as thick as shock pine needles. So let's give a cheer in all our best way on 16th of March, Saint Urho's Day. So with this poem, we're showing the fact that this is a transitional culture that you have. You have Finnish Americans moving from being a primarily Finnish speaking group to being, this kind of transitional dialect of Finglish into English with a Finnish twang. There's entire books on this subject, which are really, really great. A wonderful dictionary called Amerikan Suomi, done by Pertti Virtaranta in the 1990s. Well, over the course of like 40 years it was done, but encapsulates a lot of Finglish words if you ever want to check it out. But if we look at this, we can see some things. So first of all, native Finnish speakers, I do apologize if any of this sounded cringy to you. We have our own culture and we roll with it and we do what we can with it, right? And so this first line, we've got uksi kuksi kolamavi. Anybody know what those are?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, pretty close. It's weird because they skip from 4 straight to 5, don't they? Yeah. So it's yksi, kaksi, kolme, viisi, right? So they immediately 1, 2, 3, 5 because they need it to rhyme. Saint Urho is the boy for me. He chased out the hoppers as big as birds. Never before have I heard those words. I'll tell you what the words are in a minute. He really told those bugs of green, bravest Finn I ever seen. Some celebrate for Saint Pat and his snakes, but Urho poika got what it takes. He got tall and strong from Vilja, so the clabbered milk that Finnish people eat, sour, because it is sour, and ate kalamajaka, fish stew, every hour. So that's why that guy could chase those beetles, what grew as thick as jack pine needles. So let's give a cheer in our best way on 16th of March, St. Urho's Day. So, sorry, this is one of the things about this stuff is I get excited and I always forget one little thing. So when St. Urho went ahead and chased out the grasshoppers, he does it using this kind of incantation that he uses. So he holds up his pitchfork and he shouts out, hei nasirka, mene tältä hiteen. And he says that a couple of times and it drives these grasshoppers out into the sea and they die. Now this is a Finnish phrase, which literally translates to, hey, grasshopper, go to hell. But a lot of times people will kind of dampen that sound down a little bit to say, get the heck out of here. So essentially, though, he uses this incantation, which is actually, if you ever read Kalevala, you know that people use words a lot to affect magic. Vainamoinen can build entire boats just by talking. So, this isn't all that unusual within the Finnish tradition to do that. But this poem, again, is a really interesting kind of study in this idea of Finnish American transitional language and the way that you're going to go ahead and create new things and make this story. So this poem becomes extremely popular. And it's something that, you know, if you Google it, you can find all kinds of images of it. You can see people have stylized printouts of it that they put up. You know, so this poem has lasting power within the whole Saint Urho's Day tradition. So I'm going to leave that just as that story, the foundational story of Saint Urho, and I'm going to tell you this foundational story of Heikki-lunta, and then we'll move back and talk about how the two develop and grow and why. So we now come to Heikki-lunta. So first, I want to introduce this guy right over here. This is Dave Ryuta, who was the inventor of Heikki-lunta. He was a really, really wonderful guy who passed away about 5 years ago now. And I was really, really lucky to get to work with him when I was an early folklorist, learning about how to be a folklorist. And he was always very patient with me while I asked stupid questions. And I always thought it was really bizarre that somebody was paying to go to college to ask about a radio song that he wrote back in the 70s. So what ended up happening is in the year 1970, every year in December, they would have right here in the town I live in, South Range, this thing called the Range Snowmobile Championships races. And so they would have just this day of races, and it was really super exciting. This is the original advertisement for that 1970 December event. And you can see Miss Wisconsin was going to be there. There was going to be some skydivers. There was, you know, prizes for going on this track and winning the race, like all kinds of exciting stuff. So this is a really big event and tons of money. You can see all the sponsors right here. Tons of money has been put into this event. And if you've ever been to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the winter, and especially to the Copper Country, you know that the Copper Country gets about 250 inches of snow a year. It's a lot. We have not met that quota this year, which is a little strange. Probably I'll explain why in a minute. But you know, this is an event that was very important. It brought in a lot of money to the community, and it's something that people were banking on a lot. And so as like the snow doesn't really come, and there's not going to be enough snow for this event, the advertisers, the sponsors, everybody's really kind of freaking out. So one of the key sponsors was WMPL Radio here in Hancock, and or one of the key promoters of it actually. And so the people who were doing the races contacted the radio and said, look, even if we don't get enough snow to actually have a race, we're still going to have something happen. I mean, Miss Wisconsin's coming, snow or not. So we got to have something happen. Do you think you could put up an advertisement that just lets people know that? I should also mention, it's not all that unusual to not have very much snow here in early December. Usually right around Christmas time is when it really starts to get heavy, but it's still a little nerve-wracking, especially there was snow earlier back in the 1970s. We would actually get more snow every year. So anyway, they go ahead and say, yeah, we'll set up an advertisement. When do you want it? As soon as possible. So they turned to David Ryuta, who back then in 1970 was an air salesman for Wimple. And they said, look, could you like just take your lunch break and think of something to say for an advertisement really quick for this thing? Just anything, it doesn't matter. We just want to make sure people come. So Dave goes, yeah, I've got an idea. So the legend that he tells is that he went and borrowed a beat up old broken guitar, and over his lunch break goes ahead and writes this song called the Heikki-lunta Snow Dance Song. And I'll tell you the words in a minute, but he goes ahead and comes back after his lunch and he records this song, and they record it, I guess, you know, if they recorded it on wax or on an open reel or what, but they recorded it and they play it immediately. And this song ends up being much like the Ode to Saint Urho. It has a lot of Finglish sounds in it. And, you know, much like there were some Finnish American musical performers, like I'm thinking of Bobby Arrow, for instance, from the Iron Range, who would perform with this kind of Finnish American twang, but it still wasn't all that common to just hear this on the radio. And so the song that David Ryuta sang in 1970, actually it's to the tune of There's a Place in France, if any of y'all remember that song from when you were kids. So this is it. My gosh, am I gonna sing? Yeah, I might, what the hey. Here's to you, Dave, this is water. Now I'll sing my song to make the snow come down, and I'll do my snow dance. Whoops, I almost lost my pants. I'll holler and I'll yell and I'll really give it. It's Heikki Snow Dance Song, Heikki-lunta Snow Dance Song. We've got to have some snow by the 4th of December. Heikki-lunta make it snow, say all the Range Club members. The races are only 3 weeks away, and if I don't make it snow, I'll go back to making hay. It's Heikki-lunta Snow Dance Song, Heikki Snow Dance Song. Now I'll dance some more and I'll really know the score, how to make it snow. Come on, man, go, go, go. Don't even slow down till the snow starts falling down. It's Heikki-lunta Snow Dance Song, Heikki-lunta Snow Dance Song. So he plays this on the radio, right? And someone calls and says, what was that song? Like, that's super cool. Could you play that again? And so, yeah, we'll play a radio advertisement again. So they play it again. And then they played it again. And people just kept calling in and being, what is that song? Like, that's really cool. Can we play it some more? And so they play it some more. And, you know, this is a couple weeks away from the snow race. Well, the popular legend that happens here in the Copper Country is that this song got played so much and people just loved it so much, it actually snowed. And a blizzard ensued, and it was this terrible blizzard, and it snowed so hard and for so long that the races were canceled. Now, I don't like to break popular belief, but I have seen pictures of the races that year, so I'll just say perhaps they were delayed. I don't know. But at any rate, this song just kind of ends up striking some very strange nerve up here in the Copper Country. And so people start asking for it. And after a while, and the winter too, the winter of 1970, 1971 was legendarily bad up here, and it just kept snowing. And in the spring, things are getting really bad and people are getting really tired of seeing the snow. And so Dave Ryutas actually told me that he was accused by locals of being a kind of like a shaman or a Finnish tietäjä. And so they were saying that he had some sort of strange power and they were getting mad at him. He said people would actually throw snowballs filled with rocks at him, that he was being chased around town, and they were saying, you need to stop this stuff, man, make that song end. So WMPL radio went ahead and asked him to record a different song. So he records a song to the same tune called Hakeem to Go Away. And the basic point to the song is that he's overdone it with his dance, that next time anybody asks him to do this dance, he's going to ask for money because it's not worth all the trouble. And that, you know, he really hopes that this whole thing dies down so he can go back to his normal life. So, of course, this is in probably March or April of 1971. Spring is going to happen. So miraculously, the snow stops and, you know, Heikki Lunta has made the day start again. So WMPL, based on the popularity of this, goes ahead and gets a bunch of albums made. So they make a bunch of 45s and they sell these things across the country. And stories start pouring in that, you know, my cousin works for a radio station in San Diego or San Francisco, and he put this on and it snowed in San Francisco immediately. And so this kind of really strange legend about this snow dance song kind of grows. And it really kind of starts something. So now both Saint Urho and Heikki Lunta, this is where the stories are going to start to really converge, because we have these characters that are created. Things have been done that cause these two characters to strike a nerve within these local populations that they live in, and their story is starting to spread out a little bit, right? And so the thing that really starts to kind of naturally happen with both characters is that people start to create these little kind of festival events surrounding them. So of course, Saint Urho is designed based on the idea that he is a festival, that there is going to be a festival celebrating him, and that it's going to be March 16th after they got rid of May 24th. Heikki Lunta ends up at first kind of showing up in people's festivals that were happening for other reasons. And so in the 1970s, the first sighting of Heikki Lunta at a festival actually happens with this thing called the Delaware Ride-In, which was a snowmobile ride festival that would happen at this tourism mine in Delaware up here in the UP. And so up here in this corner is my friend James Regis, who was asked to dress up as Heikki Lunta one time. And so you immediately see the stereotype of Heikki Lunta ends up being somebody who might have like a kind of raccoon skin hat. He's wearing a fur coat. He's got big, like kinnas in Finnish, kintat or gentas in Finglish. You know, he's just this very kind of woodsy guy. And so they would just have him kind of show up and lead the party that as soon as people showed up from the snowmobiling, and then it would lead into, you know, drinking and eating and stuff like that. But in the 1980s, another festival develops in Houghton, Michigan called Drum Out Winter. And so that's where they would actually have a man dress up like Heikki Lunta. And the people would show up, the other people who weren't dressed up like Heikki Lunta, and they would be wearing like Hawaiian t-shirts or like swimsuits over long johns. And, you know, this is happening about this time of year in the Upper Peninsula where it's still cold and it could conceivably blizzard. What they would do to the poor guy dressed up as Heikki Lunta is they would hog tie him and lead him out of town with a noisy parade to drum out the winter. And, you know, they would leave him at the edge of the village and then go back over to this bar that sponsored it and kind of enjoy themselves and have a good time. But you know, people are starting to really take this character and take it on and do new things with this. This same thing is going on with Saint Urho. So in the Iron Range in Minnesota, people are having, you know, first they might have something like an office party with cake and stuff like that. It starts to grow where there's this one story that a lady tells in this really good book by Joanne Ussala called The Legend of Saint Urho, where a lady named Janice Laulinen, who works at a department store in Minneapolis, first she's just really kind of this ambassador of Saint Urho and she really likes him. So she decorates her office as that, and she kind of brings little treats for her office mates and stuff like that. after getting out of work, she would take the decorations from her office and take any treats she had and bring them to her father's retirement home and kind of entertain the family members there and stuff. And so there's these kind of little parties and celebrations that are happening. But over time, St. Urho ends up being this very public festival event in different communities across the United States, particularly. And so you can see in especially like Finland, Minnesota, people always tell me, you have to go there. I'm like, I know, I really wish we didn't have class on St. Urho's Day, because they do have these big, parades. There's all kinds of fun and revelry. One of my friends that I went to graduate school with, also a folklorist, is from, Biwabik. And so she always has these really great stories about all the fun that people have. And one of these days we're going to go and we'll do field research. That's what we'll call it. But you can see that this idea of what colors are going to be associated with the saint end up being kind of coalesced and sort of solidified. And so purple and green end up being this big deal for St. Urho. And of course, a lot of us are wearing that today. It's hard for y'all to tell, but I've got green earrings and a purple and green shirt, a little too dark. Also my Urho pins, just in case, and my Galan Kalala pin for good luck. But that idea of kind of dressing up, of doing different kind of festive parade things, of having fun in the way that you and your community want to, are really great. And one of the things that's actually really nice about both this tradition of Heikilunta and St. Urho is that they have no precedent in Finland. And so for Finnish Americans, there wasn't really actually a way they could do it wrong. There wasn't anyone to say that, this isn't really how we would celebrate this in Finland, and it's not quite the right way, because there wasn't a such thing. And so this is really this instance of creating a unique Finnish American culture that people could celebrate out in the open, and that they could share with their ethnic and interethnic neighbors in such a way that whatever you wanted to do would work. And if somebody tried something and it didn't work out, well, you just stopped doing it and did something new. So this is kind of the really exciting element of both Heikilunta and St. Urho, is that in the festival creation, you really see people trying out and seeing what things are going to stick over time. I remember there was this weird travel guide I read back when I was about 20 called America Bizarro. And the author details a St. Urho's Day parade that happens in the Hood River Valley in Oregon every year, which Hood River Valley actually has a lot of Finnish ethnic settlers there as well. And so what they would do is, there was this guy apparently who had this really great convertible car, and he would lead this kind of street parade, and he would always wear a bright green leisure suit. So, you imagine something wild and green from the 70s with the strange patterns and the wide collars. That was this guy. And you would have this brigade of women who would wear Viking horn kind of hats, and they all would be holding Hoover vacuum cleaners and doing some sort of almost like a drum majorette move with Hoover vacuum cleaners. And of course, Hoover vacuum cleaners do have a Finnish connection there. So there's this kind of really strange nationalist sort of thing going on. But it worked for them. It was anything goes. It makes no sense if you're just somebody else driving into town, you see a bunch of ladies with Viking horns and vacuum cleaners, but for them, that was the thing that was cool. I have a colleague in Turku, Finland, and for the past about 30 years, the folklore students at the University of Turku have also had their own St. Urho's Day activities that they do. They have some sort of recital that they do, and kind of like a skit, you could call it. So people adjust it to how it is that it makes sense for them. A gaggle of folklorists is going to have a very different celebration than, a gaggle of celebrants, maybe at a local bar or something like that. But it really does allow for creativity to happen. The St. Urho's Day celebration that I'm most familiar with as a public celebration was one that I would go to in Detroit, actually, back in the early 2000s when I was an undergraduate student and then a graduate student. And so, I lived in East Lansing, Michigan. It was rather close to Detroit. So I joined the Finnish Center Association for a while. And so for the first few years that I did St. Urho's Day, it was actually in Detroit. And what they did is they have a hall there. And at their hall, they would decorate it in purple and green. They would have really cool little table tents, and they would have, actually got one of my St. Urho's Day pins from there, and you would go and you would dress up in the purple and green, and they would have a kind of normal evening dinner where you would just sit with people and talk and chat. But then they started having different games and stuff. And a lot of St. Urho's Day festivals follow an American festival tradition, which is where they crown a king and sometimes a queen who is, going to be St. Urho that night. And so here you can see, this is Frank Goldberg from Detroit, and he was crowned St. Urho that night. And so he got to wear this purple kind of velvety robe and this crown, and he has this pitchfork, and he led all the rest of us. There was a group of performers who played the accordion and kind of led us in a procession with St. Urho at the front. This celebration too, it's a lot of the members of the Finnish Center Association are typically above retirement age, at least at that time. And so one of the cool things that would happen at this festival in particular is there would be these little instances where people would talk about different things that related to their Finnish heritage in a very strong kind of Finnish sense. And so one year when I went, they had this Finnish American food tasting where people could try bilia. And I think we tried a moyaka as well that year. So, I mean, just very kind of home foods, right? Like bilia isn't like the, pate of Finland or anything like that, but it is something that has this very strong ethnic association, and it has these kind of really great associations with home and being Finnish. So, it's not a terrible surprise that they would have that. One kind of really interesting festival development that's happened with St. Urho, I would say, is the Miss Helmy drag competition. And so this happens in Finland, Minnesota, and it's actually where men will dress up in drag to compete to be Mrs. Urho, basically. And so that's kind of an interesting development that, it's been going on at least for 20 years from what I understand. And, it works in the community and they roll with it. And it's a great way to kind of bring people into the fun in different ways that they might not. It also probably gives guys a chance to try on some of the uncomfortable clothes that us women put up with on a daily basis. So maybe, they learn something. One of the other things that's been really strong with Heikkilunta is the creation of music. And so a lot of bands have actually, in addition to Dave Ruta making his 2 songs, there's 4 additional songs out there. One's done by this band called The Yoopers. It's extremely, really popular. Like, I mean, I've seen The Yoopers tapes being sold in Texas. This other group, Konga Semenne, it's a group from Marquette that's known for a kind of polka reggae hybrid band. And it's really ingenious. And actually their name, Konga Semenne, comes from the Finnish phrase kuinka se menee, which means like, how does it work or how's it going? But in Finnish America, it means like, how are you doing or how is it going? And so, they kind of have this play on words that works in a Finglish context. That's very cool. You see with St. Urho, a lot more kind of material items are created. And so just, I'm wearing 3 St. Urho's Day pins right now. I can show you close up later. But I also find a lot of things like greeting cards are done for St. Urho's Day. There used to be e-cards back, in the early 2000s when people would send e-cards. There were tons of St. Urho's Day e-cards. Over here, you can see, the bobblehead like I have. Here's a small replica of the Monaga, Minnesota statue. And then even a St. Urho beer, which the archivist would not allow me to open up and taste, which that was strange. Over here on the right, you have a man named Joseph Killinen, who was from North Dakota, and he also lived in Minnesota for a while. And starting in the 1970s, he got really, really interested in St. Urho, and he becomes like the #1 fan of St. Urho. And he would go around and try to get different Finnish American community members to promote it and to be interested in him. You can see, he was so interested, he got the personalized plate for the state of Minnesota. So all the rest of us can't have it now. But one of the things that he was really instrumental in doing was getting all 50 states to have a governor proclamation of St. Urho's Day over time. And it takes quite a while, right? You got to find like the right governor who's going to take this seriously or find it interesting or think that Finnish Americans are a constituency worth noticing in their state. But he did it over time. It took quite a while. I will also say that his story also shows a lot of blowback because he did contact an honorary consul back, I want to say in the 1980s, to try to get his support for this thing. And the consul wrote back to him and said, St. Urho represents the worst in Finnish American culture. It's not Finnish, it's degenerate, it's, really stupid and a waste of time. And there's no way on earth I'm going to help you with this mission. So he didn't get help from that guy, but he didn't need it in the end. So, you have these people who just go with it and decide that you're going to do that one really big thing with it and roll with it. So, Joseph Killinen with St. Urho, Daryl Syria with multiple songs about Heikkilunta. Then there's also the small traditions that small groups have. So these are the things that people do together that acknowledge the celebration in some way and that acknowledge the character in some way, but don't fully make it something that you would do in a broader public. So here on the left, we have the Heikkilunta Drifters, which is a snowmobile club situated, they have members between like Arizona and Michigan. But what they do is if you want to join their group, you have to do this dare whereby you ride on your snowmobile in your underwear for like a minute. And it shows that you have the sisu that you need in order to be a real true snowmobiler. So, if you want to do that and try it out. And actually, it was kind of hilarious because they started this, they came up here to go snowmobiling one year and there wasn't enough snow. And so they were chatting with the bartender and they were like, yo, what do you do to make it snow around here? So the bartender said, well, what you do is you need to go outside and strip down into your underwear and dance and just shout Heikkilunta, Heikkilunta, and eventually it'll happen. And so they did that. And as a bartender from the UP, I know that we love to tell these kind of stories. You always tell the tourist story and hope they'll listen. They did it this time. So they went out and they danced in their underwear in the snow. And sure enough, a massive blizzard. They got 13 inches of snow. The next day was a wonderful day of snowmobiling and it saved their trip. And so from that time on, they decided to have that be their initiation ritual, that everybody must ride their snowmobile in their underwear. Hopefully they don't do that too long, because it doesn't sound terribly safe. But it's still something that they do to acknowledge the Finnish American snow god. Over here on the right, I actually stole this. There's a cocktail hour that actually happened later tonight in celebration of Saint Urho. It'll happen over Facebook. And so they're making grasshopper drinks, which is like creme de menthe, creme de cacao, and I think cream maybe is in it. So just something like that, where you do something small to acknowledge him. In COVID, we don't really have a chance to get to see each other. And if I wasn't doing this lecture today, the thing that I would just be doing is wearing the purple and the green. I have to, and I would probably wear my pins just to acknowledge that thing. And people send emails to me or texts or whatever saying Happy St. Urho's Day. So there's always these small rituals that you do. It's not a part of some official canon of celebrating St. Urho or Heikki-lunta, but it's the way that we take these things and make them our own because they're interesting. So the one other thing I want to say really quickly is that we have something called Hakeem here in the Upper Peninsula. It's a midwinter festival that happens in late January when there's not COVID. It actually wasn't based off of Heikki-lunta, but we have these multiple Heikkis that we celebrate when we do this. So one is Bishop Henrik, who is the actual patron saint of Finland, who helped to affect the, continue along the conversion to Catholicism back then of Finns. We have, of course, Heikki-lunta. So here's a modern depiction of Heikki-lunta. And you can see he's wearing kind of one of these stereotypical upper Midwestern flannel shirts. It's kind of ripped up. It's looking very frayed and shoddy. He's got this crown of cedar, which is kind of a very Finnish Americans. We love cedar. Like birch is really, really great, but cedar also is really great. And that's the important switch that we actually typically use for sauna would be cedar a lot of the time. But you can see there's snow attached to it. And then finally, he's got a Finnish flag. So it's really saying something that, this is an important part of this character's identity is his affiliation with being Finnish. And then finally, if you're considered a good Finn at some point, you might be crowned Hankoki Heikki, so the Heikki of Hancock. So just so you know, the Hakeem Päivä, it's not about Heikki-lunta, but Heikki-lunta definitely has a huge part in it now. And so this just comes to the idea of something that we call in folklore, the invention of tradition. And so tradition invention happens a lot of time in cultures where there's really, really big changes happening and where people feel like the things that are holding their community and their culture and society together are kind of eroding. And so this is something that's been documented a lot. Scottish tartan traditions are an example of invention of tradition. They became really important during like the Victorian era, even though before they were kind of suppressed and not really used and not considered in the same way they are now. You could say the same thing about Finnish kansallispuku, even though it is based off of real use of fabric, like it really becomes this important kind of national and regional symbol over time, and it becomes like solidified in these different forms. So basically, cultures, again, when they're feeling endangered, they're feeling worried about stuff, they start to create new things to both soften the shift that they see happening in culture and to create these senses that things aren't all changing, but also to create new things. Because a lot of times when things stop having meaning in culture, they do get replaced by new things. You need to have new things to have meaning in your life. And so these, even though they're very tongue in cheek, nobody's actually religious about either the Finnish American snow god or the Finnish American patron saint. They do give us something to focus on, and they do give us something to celebrate still being Finnish, despite the fact that most of us don't speak Finnish, despite the fact that we might not get to eat Finnish foods all the time. Some of us might not even ever get to visit Finland, but still having these focal points that really represent our identity and the things that we've been through in life are a very, very important part of cultures. And that's how cultures go. I mean, we would just run out everything, right? And just sit there in a white t-shirt and not do anything. So, all these years of language shift and intermarriage, people living in these kind of remote areas where you can still have these pockets has allowed for things like St. Urho and Heikki-lunta to grow. And when people from these areas who practice these things move out and come into new communities and share these things, it only makes it richer and wider. That's why you can go to a St. Urho celebration in Detroit. That's why people bring their grandchildren to them and have them race like little grasshoppers across the floor, is to make that a tradition for them. And so my kids today, I left the house before they were all fully up and dressed. So I don't know if they're wearing purple or green, but I can guarantee you that at least one of them is going to say Happy St. Urho's Day to me today, or ask if I can have them have a grasshopper. No. But one of the other things too with this idea of tradition invention is that there's this proclamations by the governors that were done. Those also really help to solidify it. It really shows this idea that Finnish people, wherever they live in the United States, have become a part of a broader American culture, and that we can create things that are unique to ourselves, but that allow other people to participate. So these two traditions are very, very participatory. They're very open to anybody. And if you embrace either of them, you're welcome, and you can do what you like with it. And if it's really terrible, someone will tell you. So the very last two things I'll really kind of mention quickly are that Finnish this Finnish ethnic image that's kind of developed over time has both kind of positive and negative aspects to it. And I would say, Finnish Americans who have lived here for quite a while are not unfamiliar with the things that have been said about us, right? So, there are a lot of stereotypes of Finnish Americans in the Upper Peninsula, Upper Midwest, where, the stereotypes are that we drink a lot, that we do things that are strangely self-defeating. This little comic here in the corner was done by a French-Canadian guy who, for whatever reason, just did not like Finns. And the caption there says, Smithila and Wessinen, one-shot Finnish revolver. Well, you can see what will happen with the gun if someone were to shoot it, right? And of course, they use these kind of Finnish word endings in order to make it sound Finnish. Finnish people in the 1800s, some kind of early anthropologists were classifying them as not being white. This is a part of like early kind of weird Darwinism gone wrong, and also leads into things like eugenics. But Finns, right, this is the idea of kind of like the height of human culture is this Mythalander. And obviously he must be Germanic or, British or something. But Finns end up being categorized as Mongol. Okay. And there were some reasons why that could actually be beneficial for Finns who are like, well, we're not Swedes and we're not Russians. We're something totally different. We deserve our own culture and identity and country. But when racism happens, it's really bad. The way that people use to classify humans can be extremely bad. Finnish language being related to the Finno-Ugrian languages makes them very different. It makes them somebody that people from neighboring, like Sweden or Russia, like there's not all that much common ground that, Swedes can, like if you speak Swedish, you can kind of understand German. It's not going to be that hard to learn English because they're very closely related, but Finns didn't have that. Also, there's a lot of negative stereotypes of Finnish radicalism and leftism, right? So, I've had people tell me that, I had like a communist ancestor or something. And I'm like, okay, thank you for that information. I don't feel bad about that. So people still kind of use that as an insult today, both within the Finnish community and outside of it toward Finnish people themselves. But there's also this very strong sense of pride that Finnish Americans have. And so, when you come up to the Copper Country, you'll see people do things that are this kind of weird inversive pride. Like right here, you've got a guy holding a sign that says Crazy Finns. These folks all just participated in a polar bear dive where they jump into the water in very dramatic ways with costumes and stuff like that. And so, this sign has the Finnish flag showing the pride. It has Crazy Finns saying, people may think we're crazy, but, we're enjoying it. We're loving our lives. And you'll see bumper stickers up here all the time, Finn Power, Got Sisu, all these kind of things. And so even when people feel that pressure of this kind of negative, longstanding idea of what it's like to be Finnish, there's also this positive response that happens where people say, okay, we're weird and crazy. You think we're bad people, whatever. We're fine with ourselves and we're going to roll with it. So this Heikkilunta and Saint Urho are very much expressions of what it means to be Finnish American today and what it means to be so in this kind of tongue-in-cheek, very fun, very open way of doing things. So with that, this is basically the end. These characters continue to develop. As long as people pick these up, as long as people like us get together and do something like this, and as long as people like us bring other people into this environment and show them what Heikkilunta and Saint Urho are, they'll always continue to be. And they'll continue to grow in different ways. Sometimes we might not like the ways they grow. Sometimes we might be really thrilled by them. But it'll continue to grow in the ways that people need them to grow. And that's one of the really, really important things about culture. So I always like to cite photo sources. And I also always like to provide for more information. And so if anybody's interested in this PowerPoint, you can ask for it and I'll send it to you, or, and this video will be up and available shortly after this. So are there any questions?
Thank you, Hilary. That was really wonderful and very interesting. So another virtual applause. And it is now actually 7 o'clock, just for those who weren't watching. It was too fascinating for words. I'm going to open the floor for questions. If anybody has any comments or questions or suggestions for another way we can celebrate these two heroes here in our areas. So
maybe I can start. Thank you very much, Professor Virtanen, for this very lively and interesting presentation. Now, I had always thought that this Saint Urho Day was invented or developed as a counterbalance for this Saint Patrick's Day. And I have been in quite a number of Saint Patrick's Days attended here in the compound where we are living. We have plenty of people of Irish origin. And I don't see any humorous in those parties what the Irish people are having. As again, these both of these celebrations, Saint Urho's and Heikki Lunta celebrations, they seem to be really aimed at having great fun all the time.
Mhm.
And that is make a big difference. So I also that in a way that the whole at least Saint Urho's Day was established to ridicule those Saint Patrick's Day people and their seriousness about these things. Well, apart from that, thank you very much for that. I did not introduce myself. I'm Turto Turtiainen, the president of Finlandia Foundation National Capital Chapter, and we asked you to concentrate on these topics. But at the same time, there are quite a number of other celebrations in the United States, and I and my wife, we have often been in West Palm Beach, where there is it called Finlandia Festival or something like that?
Yeah.
Not so much to have fun as to get people together, but actually it can be also very serious, at least in golf competitions where we have participated. So there are also very Finnish activities there, like the dancing halls, which where we are dancing tango and waltz, the Finnish style, in the Finnish style, and so on. So my question to you would be just that I'm sure you know about this type of festivals also, which are there. Are there some others in the United States where the Finns are getting together and celebrating something?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Finnish American festival life is really, really fascinating. It's a huge area. And so, you can see one example I can think of off the top of my head, because I know it very well, is Juhannus, right? So just like in Finland, they have midsummer. Finnish Americans celebrate midsummer in a lot of different ways too. And so I'm from Toivola, Michigan, which has this extremely traditional kokko and this kind of really great celebration that happens with dancing and feasting. And there's all kinds of elements that you would typically expect to see. So that's one that I can see where, it has these direct ties to Finland. And then, you're mentioning like Festival of Finlandia. I haven't been to it myself, but I know a lot of the elements that you're talking about. And so it's kind of where you're taking America, because we're interethnic and because we're kind of multicultural, we've developed this sort of model of festivals that has things like I mentioned, like crowning a king and queen, or kind of having some sort of leader of the group for the day. Things like competitions that could happen. So I don't know if there might be like dancing competitions or something like that, or else, you can tell that the best of the dancers or the best musicians and the best foods are all going to be offered. You can see that too with things like FinFest USA. It's kind of like this gathering that happens in a community that either has a lot of Finns in it or has a strongly active Finnish American community. And that's both an event where you're going to have both these kind of festival elements, dancing, having coffee with people, things like that, alongside these learning things like workshops or lectures and stuff. So there's a huge range of things that Finnish Americans do with their festivals, and some of them tie very directly to Finland. Finnish Independence Day is very huge in the United States. Like I know a lot of different communities that celebrate that. So, it just kind of depends on the interests of the group and the things they want to do. But yeah, it's a huge array. Actually, I can send you a book chapter on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hilary, there's a chat question, and it touches on something I wanted to know. It says, has Saint Urho crossed back to Finland in any way? And then there's a comment that there's a Saint Urho's bar in Helsinki, but it's not clear if it's reference to the president or the American Saint Urho. And I wanted to know what your Finnish friends think about these festivals. I mean, I don't know if you've discussed it with them. So
yeah. So Finnish people, we get a lot of Finnish visitors to Hancock. And so they end up coming to a town where in the summertime, we have Finnish flags on every other flagpole. We have streets that have other like Finnish names attached to them too, in addition to their local like English names. And then we have all these different festivals and celebrations. So in response to Richard Palmer's question, I would say that Saint Urho has crossed a tiny bit. A lot of my Finnish friends have not heard of him. So a lot of times when we get visitors from Finland that might come for a variety of different reasons, when I tell them about Saint Urho and Heikki-lunta, they've never heard of it. They think it's completely bizarre. And especially for anybody who's a Finnish speaker out here, you know that Heikki-lunta, like the word lunta actually isn't the word for snow per se. It's the word for some snow. It's in the partitive. And so that's a kind of tell that it's a Finnish American thing, because, you know, when you transfer from having Finnish language as your primary language, and you know that there's this word snow, lumi, lunta, lumein, you know, like you can put it all in the different case endings and stuff like that. Finnish Americans have a habit of only remembering the partitive form of words. So because most of the time you're only going to talk about some snow. You're not talking about all the snow on earth. You know, you only want to drink some milk or some coffee. Like you don't want all of that thing. You know, you're not some weird evil, you know, Dr. Evil or something who wants all the stuff. But so this, you know, this kind of Finnish American thing that people see over there, they find it very fascinating. They think it's really cool that we end up doing these things. And sometimes people, you know, I mean, I've had Finnish friends who, mostly the extent is that they'll tell me, hey, happy St. Urho's Day or something like that. But I think I had mentioned that the University of Turku, the folklore department there, actually has a St. Urho's Day celebration every year. And they, a couple years ago, wrote this book. I actually have a chapter in it too. It's called St. Urho from Folklore to Folklore. It's a bilingual book that talks about the idea of St. Urho first, you know, just this joke that somebody invented and how it became something that's very well established in Finnish America. So I would love to get to go to one of their celebrations sometimes too, because I think it would be cool to see how Finns do Finnish America, you know. But yeah, also the St. Urho's bar in Helsinki, that one I don't know if it's about St. Urho or Urho Kekkonen. I guess, like, I mean, I've heard of it, you know, people have mentioned it, and I never get enough time to bar hop when I'm in Helsinki. But one of these days I might have to go check. It's research, darn it. I must find out.
Hilary, first of all, thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. I remember I'm one of the board members to the Finlandia Foundation here in DC. I remember when Torso brought up as an agenda point, discussing, are we presenting enough Finnish American traditions in our programming, and I had read the agenda ahead of time, and I thought I had heard of Saint Uros, and maybe this could be a possible way we could do something this year in this pandemic to sort of bring a new information about this wonderful tradition, but also make it into a humorous but also engaging. And then it was Taro who said, "Oh, I know somebody who might be able to do this." So it's been a pleasure to listen to your lecture. It's been a lot of fun. I know it's funny. It's interesting because my father, who's here, George Hobart, on the Zoom, he actually spent some of his childhood up in Michigan, with some of our relatives. It's kind of a place that I've always wanted to go to. So I'm planning a trip in 2023. I have to plan very far in advance, but I'd like to go to the Hiking Paiva festival. And it would just be, I'm one of those, folks in my family, as well as my friends, that I can never have enough snow in my life. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, if you come, you absolutely need to get in touch with me. I'd be more than happy to show you around or tell you stuff.
Yeah. And I had one quick question. I took some notes while you were talking, and you had mentioned that there was someone with a bright green leisure suit, and then there was women with Viking helmets with Hoover vacuums. Mm-hmm. And then you said, and why that is. I don't know why that is.
So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Vina Hoover was like the vacuum cleaner magnate. So he's actually a Finnish American, and I mean, I don't know his full story. I know that we have a Hoover Center here on campus that's named after him. But yeah, I mean, that's really just a basic story. I think his name in Finland was Huovinen, and anglicized it. So yeah, sorry about that. We all know about
Cool. I
Hebrew
think that's
vacuum. I mean,
great.
it's a top of mind, right?
Okay. Are there any other comments? Speak up. Maybe everybody went to design their own party. So,
Yeah, Jody points out that there is a activity. So if you look at the chat right now, you can get this information about their St. Urho's Day on Friday. So cool. Oh, that'll be fun. Thank you.
I did have a quick question. My parents were all Finnish immigrants from the 1890s, turn of the century period. And I had this, the family story goes that my grandfather came up in 1890 and he was supposed to serve in the Tsar's army before he would be allowed to immigrate to the United States. And so he borrowed the ID card of a friend or his cousin to come over. And so that meant that he didn't want to serve in the Tsar's army.
Mhm.
From the 1890s, did they serve in the Tsar's armies earlier than 1902?
I don't think so. That's like, I'm afraid like that part of Finnish history isn't my full forte, just because I mean, I'm just kind of more of a generalist with regards to that kind of history. So, I mean, the most notable date I know for when people really fled the military was 1902. But what I'll say is that in 1881, Tsar Alexander II was assassinated. And Tsar Alexander, like whatever you think of czars, he actually was a pretty good czar for Finland. Like he put forth some reforms that helped certain things with Finland. He allowed Finland to have their own currency. I believe he was the one who did allow them to have basically what we would think of as kind of like a national guard. And so for that reason, they didn't need to actually serve in the army. So there were these times when after 1881, when he gets assassinated, Alexander III comes in. And Alexander III was very autocratic. He was very pushy. He didn't like Finnish people having this kind of semi-autonomous thing. And so I do believe that he did try to kind of push that a bit and try to kind of get Finns into the Finnish military. He was trying to put Finland into Russia a lot. Like he really starts this idea of Russification, which his son Nicholas II, the final Tsar of Russia, carries forth. So it's, I mean, it is entirely possible that there was this threat that he was going to be put in the army, because they know the threat was made. I'm not sure that they really carried forth with it until 1899, and then they figured out it wasn't going to work. So, they did try again during World War I or right before World War I to kind of Russify a little bit more with Finland. But of course, the Tsar, Tsar Nicholas II should have been a soccer dad. Like he really had no business being a Tsar of anything. And, World War I was going on and he was a little bit too distracted to really do what he wanted to with the Finns.
I'm to more of the family history, but your whole was my family history. Mm-hmm. The copper mine and being lured. I had one great uncle who was a little working in the mines because they would, and the young boys, because they were short and fast and they could carry the drill bits back and forth. Mm-hmm. My family has lots of stories. We ate pasties and had a sauna on the lake and the whole thing. So, and you were in South Range?
Yep, that's right. But I'm at my office at Finlandia now, but that's where I live.
My sisu cup.
Oh, nice. That's super cool.
So thank you so much. Really interesting. I won't.
Oh, no, thank you. That's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions?
Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting speech. I liked it very much.
Thank you.
Well, there is a kind of urban legend in Russia why this certification campaign actually started. It's of course the urban legend. I doubt that it has something to do with real things, but anyway, well, it tells like one day the last Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, was visiting Finland and with his friends, with his generals, and one of his generals wanted to send a letter or a postcard back to Russia. He placed a Russian postcard, Russian stamp, brought it to the post office, but Finnish official refused because, like, we are in Finland, you have to use Finnish post stamps. And they said, what the hell? You are the part of the Russian Empire, so why the hell should I use your Finnish post stamps? You are like subject of the Tsar, so he quickly went to the emperor and told about the whole situation. That's why the certification started. At least that was one of the reasons why.
I love that story. That's really funny. Thank you for sharing it, Ron.
Anybody else? Any,
I had one sort of correlation to of what you were talking about, sort of the how Finns and Americans sort of were creating your uniquely traditions to sort of connect their own community, but also welcoming others to participate in those traditions. I'll be brief, but when I traveled through Finland in 2017, and I stayed in the town of Kokkola, Finland, for Christmas. I was struck by there was a boat there in Kokkola that is tied with some sort of skirmish between the Finns and in a war or a battle, and some of the locals that I met at a bar called the Kilta Bar, they were just very passionate about this sort of local tradition, and they wanted me to be a part of it. And I think that's the same sort of correlation that you were talking about in your discussion, that there is just a tremendous amount of pride amongst Finns, and whether they say they're Finnish Americans or they just say we're Finns, Finnish. I think it's a really it's a great way of sort of saying we have these great traditions and we want to share them with others because we're so proud of where we came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. And I think that's something that a lot of cultures share, right? Like we all want to share the best of ourselves with the people that we want to know and to get to meet. So yeah, that's a really good correlation. That's really smart. Thank you.
here's another chat comment. It says that my family's St. Urho's tradition is to burn our holy socks in a bonfire. Not sure how common that is.
I love that. I keep my socks for some reason. I have a whole box of socks at I don't even know why. They've got holes in them. Why? Their partner isn't coming back.
You can use them for dusting.
This is true. I think I'm gonna use them for burning. I'm gonna use them for burning. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you for letting me run over. I get very excited about these things, and I can, as you can tell, I can just talk my head off.
It was worthwhile, definitely worthwhile. So thanks again, Hilary, and we look forward to, I at least look forward to revisiting this on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll share the link with you right after this.
Thank you.
Great. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. So people can Google me if you want, but thank you all very much for coming, and happy St. Urho's Day.
Hey, Nasirka.
Hey, hey.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Nasirka.